Welcome to the Global Tech Leaders Podcast, where we help business leaders and individual contributors with actionable insights to hit their number and figure out the nuances of truly operating a business globally today, squeezing the essence of the lessons learned from the planet's top tech leaders. This is your guide to joining the fast track to global market scaling.
Welcome, I'm Ross Lauder, your host from Single Focus Talent, and I'm joined by our non-exec director, John Quigley, today.
Thank you very much. Great to be here.
Today we're joined by Kevin Baum at AgriWebb. AgriWebb is transforming global cattle and sheep production with farm management software that delivers profitability, provenance, and sustainability across the supply chain. Focusing on building software for livestock farmers, AgriWebb is Australia's market leader and rapidly expanding across the globe in multiple markets, namely South Africa, New Zealand, the UK, and Brazil. I think what really struck me about this is they're bringing data to a very traditional primary industry. So very excited to have Kevin on the show today. Welcome, Kevin.
Thank you, Ross and John. It's great to be here, and I'll add the U.S. on that list. We have an office there, and we've launched as of a couple of months ago. So very excited.
A couple of minutes ago. Wow, how timely! Okay. Fantastic. So, Kevin, you're originally from the US. You made the trip down under, where they speak a different version of English, something I've done myself. I spent my university years at postgrad level in Australia. I know you also spent some time in academics in the UK. You lived there for a while too. But maybe before I spoil it all, could you maybe take us through your career thus far, some of those inflection points and what brought you to where you are today, if you will?
Yeah, absolutely. It has been a strange journey. I'll admit, I grew up outside Washington, D.C., in the suburbs of a big city, and the idea of building agricultural software in Australia was definitely not probably what I was thinking when I was there, but here I am. So look, I went to, I think, sort of a big formative experience. Certainly, growing up in D.C., it's pretty buttoned down. Everyone kind of is, a lawyer or a politician or some of these sort of finance button-down professions. And moving out to California for undergrad, I was lucky enough to go to Stanford, and that was suddenly you get out there and you're in Silicon Valley, and everyone's like, oh wow, okay, so you can just create a business. Like that's a thing. That's a job description, to just build something. And in some ways that was very inspiring. There's a lot of really innovative people there. Everyone out there really feels that they're going to change the world, and there's so much excitement and energy and passion, and that is inspiring. But I think, especially looking back on it now, but even in the moment, it was 2003 to 2007. So Facebook had just moved around the corner. Twitter kicked off while we were there. The founder of both Snapchat and Instagram were the class above and below me, and certainly have built wildly successful companies. Growth that I can't even imagine, but I definitely sort of reached a point of like, well, okay, is this actually changing the world? What are we doing here? Is helping people get, I guess, addicted to likes on the internet? Like, is that really the value? At least for me, is that really what I want to get stuck into? And I think the answer was definitely not. So I moved back east and worked in renewable energy. I got a job in a technical consulting firm looking at renewable energy projects, and sometimes it was innovation projects with large firms, but largely it was with entrepreneurs, small businesses that have been funded by, say, grant funding out of the Department of Energy or the National Renewable Energy Lab. That was awesome. I was, with people that I felt like this was an industry that's really pushing the world forward. In 500 years, will we be snapping each other? Like, maybe not, but we will need energy, we will need food, we will need infrastructure, we will need water. I mean, these things are transcendent. So this felt really meaningful and impactful work. It was really exciting to be, working with people who every day were seeing the fruit of their labor, create a result. And so I was sort of entrepreneur adjacent, which was great. But I was not an entrepreneur. I was a consultant, which meant at the end of that excitement, I had to go back and write a soul-crushing report that was 300 pages long, and I don't think anyone's ever read it. So, after 4 or 5 years of that, I kind of reached my point of, I think I want to go to the other side of this. I want to actually be operational. I want to actually be doing something. So as you mentioned, I went to graduate school in the UK at Oxford, and I met my co-founder Justin there. We were actually on the the rowing team together, which is a whole other can of worms. But he had built a very successful career, largely in the finance space. He had built and sold a couple of businesses in funds management, but his familial background was off of a farm. He was a fifth generation Australian farmer. His dad grew up on a farm, and it was very connected to him and his family. And so we became good friends and talked a lot about business and what it was like for him to start businesses. And when he moved back to Australia, he basically rang me up and said, "Hey, what do you think about, I've been looking for tools on my farm. We're running this farm. It's a small business, and he's a finance guy, and I'm asking the farm manager questions about, oh, why are we doing this, and what was the ROI on that decision?" And the answer was inevitably like, well, I don't know, we're doing it because the neighbor does it, or yeah, it was a pretty good season. It's like, well, what does that mean? As a finance guy, basically his brain was exploding. So he said, I've been looking around for tools to track data and use that to drive our on-farm decisions to make a better business. And I can't find anything out there that's not, legacy desktop software built 30 years ago that hasn't really evolved. And that's not how farmers want to work, right? They don't want to come home at the end of a long day and sit in front of a computer. They want something mobile. They want something that sits on their phone and operates the way they do. So he asked me what I thought, and I said, I think that I'm from Washington, D.C., and I don't know anything at this point in my life about farming, really. But it sounds interesting, and it sounds like, like I said, it sounds like this is one of those, really big, meaningful industries. So he invited me to come check it out. So I came down and I spent a little while on his farm and followed the manager around and asked a lot of dumb questions and, saw it firsthand and lived on the farm. And I had absolutely no idea what I was looking at, but it was really exciting because, I came back to Sydney where he lived and after that trip and we were talking about it. And it was this point where, the bigger picture started to come clear. It was yes, this is a problem on his family's farm. And this is a problem on all farms, not just in Australia, but globally. This is a huge global problem that there's just no, decision making is done by anecdote, not by data. But that also ties into a bigger problem, which is, as a species, we need to produce, I think the stats are 56% more food without using any more land, while reducing the greenhouse gas emissions by 75% by 2050. If we want to make sure that we're maintaining a sustainability in the world and we're solving, we can meet the demands that are coming out of a growing population. And how can we do that if we don't have data at the source? How can we do that if we don't actually know what's going on at inception? If you talk about food security and governments that want to, be able to trace back, say, a food outbreak to the source and shut it down, how can you do that if you don't know what's happening at the source, if you don't have data on farm? If you want to talk about consumers, demanding, more traceability, paddock to pasture to fork or whatever that, different paddock to plate down here. If you're going to have that traceability and visibility, how can you do that if there's no data on farm? So, it was this amazing, yes, we're solving these huge problems on farm, and we're creating value for farmers who are getting increasingly screwed down on by, by margins up the supply chain, by pressures, by, increasing stringentness around, traceability requirements, for these consumers. We can solve their problems, and at the same time, we can turn around and start to address macro food system problems. And that was really exciting. And that's kind of what, I think, even to this day, a lot of people in AgriWebb, that's what gets us out of bed in the morning. 3/4 of the business doesn't have a farming background like me. We've got great farming experience, great farming expertise, but a lot of us came from, whether it was other tech companies or other businesses or other industries, but we're all sort of united by, solving food problems. This is a big deal, and this is really important. And that's really inspiring. And so, I moved back home or I flew back home, and my now wife, and incredibly understanding and inspiring woman herself, said, this is awesome. Let's go do this. It wasn't in the plan, but when do we have an opportunity to do something like this? Let's go check it out. So that was, that was coming up on 7 years ago now. And I've been in Australia ever since. And actually I'm moving going to be moving over to be with the U.S. business in about 3 or 4 months. But it's been an amazing journey so far.
Wow. Wow, what a journey. So I suppose a couple of things I wanted just to dive into. You talked about time at Stanford, and you talked about how ideas were blooming and folks were, looking to create businesses as a job description. That really kind of struck me. And, you mentioned how Twitter was evolving or coming out at the time. And, if you had, like, I always think of this, I always think about pitching to my dad. If I had to pitch an idea to my dad, how long would I get through that pitch before he told me I was completely insane? Whereas, you described very eloquently a data-driven approach to a problem that's being age old, and you're solving it with technology. That for me is very obvious as an investable idea. But maybe could you share with us, why is it some Silicon Valley businesses, get crazy funding for crazy ideas, whereas sometimes, more obvious, structured, problems that are being addressed maybe have a challenge around that. Maybe could you talk to us a bit about kind of the investor community and what that looks like, and where and what and various different investor types are and what they bring to the table, if you could elaborate a bit more.
Sure. Yeah. Look, I think sometimes there's kind of this, like, you're either for or against it mentality when it comes to, let's say, the Silicon Valley style VC. And I think that, that's a false choice. Both of these, there's all different kinds of funding and funding sources and types of businesses and ways of build businesses. And they're not mutually exclusive. And they all kind of need to exist because they all fit a different style of business. And it's a choice for you as the entrepreneur, which route you want to go down. If you look at, say, there are certain types of businesses, say like the ones we talked about, like a Twitter, like a Google, like in Uber, those businesses can only kind of exist and thrive one way. And it comes from, multiple successive rounds of funding. It comes from, running at a deep loss and burning aggressively to capture market share and to create hypergrowth. And those kind of businesses probably wouldn't exist if you didn't have the kind of venture environment that does exist. But sometimes I feel that people get the impression that that's kind of the only way you can go get funding, and that's the only kind of business you can run. The reality is most businesses in the world don't follow that model. Most businesses in the world don't get those rounds. And that's not because the VCs are being unreasonable or being obnoxious. It's because that is the economics of a venture fund. They need to have $1 billion company in their portfolio to make their fund. And if you do the math on it, that's just how it works out. If they're going to create a venture rate of return, they need to have a huge 100x win, which means that they can only invest in companies that have that huge multi-billion dollar or trillion dollar, whatever it is, Amazon level potential. And that's fine. But on the flip side, there are companies, there are businesses that can be built that can add a ton of value to the world and a ton of value to customers and a ton of value to, employees that maybe are only a $500 million or maybe even a $900 million potential. And, that's not 100 billion. And so that may not attract those same, whatever, Andreessen Horowitzes of the world. But that's still value. That's still huge value, for different people. And those businesses should also exist, and they should find paths to that. And I think that's where, you can look at different sources of funding. I mean, one of the greatest sources of funding is self-funding, right? Customers paying your way. That's the best funding. That's the ultimate funding. People can look at, when I was in my early career, a lot of those companies, they were getting their money out of grants, government grants that were aligned with government objectives around energy creation, which was a huge source of funding. You can look at, angel investors and private investors, and particularly ones that understand your space. It's risky. If you're a venture capitalist and you don't necessarily know a ton about agriculture, you're going to question your ability to add value to that business. But if you find someone who has a deep history in ag, and that's been maybe how they built their career, they're willing to take on that risk because they understand your business and they can actually help you grow it. And we've gone from different pots. We've raised from aligned angel investors. We've raised some government grant funding. We've raised even an ag tech focused venture round. So we've sort of seen it all. And I think that But I think that sometimes companies get trapped in this mindset that there's only one way to go, and if you don't get Sequoia on the cap table, you're lost. And yeah, I guess I'd push back on that. I'd say it depends. It depends on what kind of company you're trying to build, what kind of culture you want to have, and what the ultimate outcome you're going to achieve is. And so I think there's room in the world for all of these things, but you just need to decide, which way you want to go. And VCs are good marketers, right? It's they're the ones writing the blogs, and they're the ones out there at the conferences, getting up and talking about it. And so they're the kind of perspective you're going to hear from them most. But there's lots of different ways to do it, and I think that all of them are equally important depending on what kind of business you're creating.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I can certainly see that, and I see that quite a bit in the conversations that we have as well. Just shifting gears for a second here, you mentioned a while back that the planet is going to need 56% more food and reduce greenhouse gases by 75%, which is no small feat. Yeah. How are we tracking as a human race as we cross the 7 billion mark? What are your thoughts for the future and how we manage ourselves, as it were?
You mean in terms of how we manage ourselves in addressing those problems?
Absolutely. I mean, how are we tracking? Yeah. I mean, there are lofty sets of goals, and I'm curious.
Yeah.
Obviously, you feed right into this. I'm really curious.
Yeah.
Are you an optimist for the future, and where are we headed?
Look, I'm always a long-term optimist. Sometimes I'm a short-term pessimist, long-term optimist. I think that as a species, we have an incredible ability to innovate. We've overcome incredibly challenging and seemingly intractable problems plenty of times in the past. But I don't think we should assume it's a given. And I also don't think we should assume that there is sort of like a silver bullet or a panacea. I think that way too often, it becomes this either or equation of how we solve these problems. And again, I would say that to solve a large, you're talking about a global, multifaceted, systemic problem, you've got to have hundreds of solutions, thousands of solutions. It comes from demand side, it comes from supply side, it comes from improving production, it comes from changing people's habits and mentalities. And so, do I think that we will solve it? I think we will, because we have to. But I also think that we need to take it a whole lot more seriously than sometimes I see people taking it. Like this is hugely important. I have 2 children now, and it's hugely important, for my future, for their future. And I think a lot of people feel that way. But we've got to also kind of embrace that there's going to be change. We can't do things the way that we're doing them. Change is inevitable, and change does not need to always be viewed as this scary thing. I think, sometimes in ag, people see, change as, we're trying to tell you that we know more than you, or that something's wrong. And that's not the case. Every industry has evolved, every industry has changed. And one of the greatest ways you can facilitate rapid change is through data. In the world we operate, if you want to improve genetics, right? If you have the data to validate what you're doing, you can improve genetics really rapidly. If you want to improve management practice, we work with groups that do regenerative agriculture. You can prove that that's working, or you can help yourself manage more effectively, more efficiently by tracking data, by using tools. So there's a million different things that have to happen to solve a problem of that scale, and but it won't come without questioning the current status quo and making sure that we are constantly pushing forward and using all the tools at our disposal in order to do that. So yes, I guess short answer is I think we will get there, but it's big and it's scary, and sometimes we definitely are trending in the wrong direction. So we always have to be kind of vigilant and make sure that there is no one size fits all solution. So make sure that each solution, even if it's only addressing 2, 3, 5, 10% of the problem, that a bunch of those are acting in concert to eat the whole whale, as they say, or to eat the whole elephant.
So Kevin, you guys are essentially shaping the digital future of agriculture, and it kind of sounds like a bit of an oxymoron, or maybe I sound like a moron, but how's that going?
We have a long way to go. No, look, it's going great. It's going great in the sense that I think what's been really exciting about what we've been able to achieve is, coming into our business, we talked about, you were mentioning earlier about, people from the outside coming in and wondering about technology and agriculture. I think that a lot of times people come in with assumptions. They come in with these preset notions about what will and won't work in an industry, what will and won't work in farming. Farmers are this way, and they're only
actually, yeah. While you're on that topic, what's the one common myth about this whole thing, or the value proposition that you want to debunk?
About which part? About building businesses within farming, or?
Yeah, exactly, and specifically your business. I'm sure sure. People have a view from the outside initially, and so like, what's a myth here that you want to debunk for anybody listening to the show? With respect to your product, or kind of digitizing agriculture in general.
Yep, I think the number one myth for me would be that farmers are not innovative. Farmers are extremely innovative. And they have been for a very long time. Some of the original innovations were all around farming. If you look at John Deere, right, you've got the driverless tractors that are going around, and there's all kinds of amazing innovation that has and continues to be embraced by farmers. There hasn't been as much necessarily on the digital side, but I don't think that's because farmers are not interested in it. And I think that we've proven, in our own way that that's not the case. The reason is that there hasn't been the right tools out there. I mean, there have been structural impediments around signal and service and that, but I think the bigger impediment has been, like I said, people making assumptions about what farmers will and won't do. Oh, farmers aren't interested in apps on their phone. Oh, farmers won't subscribe to a subscription product. Farmers aren't willing to enter their data into the cloud. None of these things are true. And the way we found that out was by trying it. People, the only way to market to farmers is through print ads, in local papers. It's like, really? Well, we're going to put a Facebook ad up and see what happens. And that's one of our primary lead drivers. So all of these assumptions about what they will and won't do, farmers are just like anyone else. They are a person who has a family, who's running a business, and they want to make that better. And when they look at products, they want that product to be simple. They want it to have a good user experience. They want it to be a really seamless onboarding process. It's no different between us and, Slack. Like, it's the same thing, and the same principles that apply in those, really exciting hypergrowth businesses. The exact same things have helped us be successful in our space. And so farmers are ready for a digital revolution. They're ready for this, but they just haven't had, the right tools that have been put in front of them. And I'm not so arrogant to think it's just us. There's other great digital ad companies out there in different verticals within agriculture, and even in our own vertical. There's other companies that have started to build businesses since we've started, and in different regions or whatever it is, and they're having success. And so I think that it's an incredibly exciting time for that. And so have we completed our mission? Absolutely not even close. We want to be expanding into many more geographies. We want to be growing at a much more accelerated rate. Like I said at the beginning, we're not just about what's happening on the farm. Everything we do is for the farmer. One of our core values as a business is live for the farmer. So everything we do needs to be protecting the interests of our core, because if the farmer loses faith, and if we lose the trust, and if we're not adding value to the farmer, it doesn't matter about anything else. It all falls over. But that said, we have always had a vision of how can we, in a mutually beneficial way, go beyond the farm, working with farm advisors, to create a consulting product that can help them, better manage, working with suppliers, working with processors, who are giving incentives to their customers so that they can, reduce their costs of production. And, we're working in different ways down the supply chain, always in a way that creates mutual benefit. But it's always been part of our mission to eventually push all the way in towards the consumer. And so we're a long way away from completing our mission, but I think how is it going is quite well, because what I believe that we've proven to ourselves is that this future does exist. Farmers are looking for it, and it's not rocket science. It's not some incredibly complicated, sophisticated algorithm. It's just creating amazing products, amazing user experiences, beautiful design and UI, and making sure that you treat them incredibly well and focus on value creation, focus on value for them. And those same tenets and principles work in this industry just as much as they work everywhere else. And so when we look for people, we want to get people that are the best in whatever that field is. If we need someone who's going to be customer facing all the time, helping farmers create value. And if they can, have a connection to ag, that's fantastic. But if we are, bringing on someone who's an engineer or a designer or a marketer, all we're concerned about is, are they an amazing engineer, designer, or marketer? Have they worked in the highest growth, fastest, most successful companies in the world? And if that's the case, they're the right person for us, because all of that is just as appreciated in this space as it would anywhere else.
Very good. So obviously your main targets are farmers, and I'm curious, how do you engage them? Like, how do you sell your software? Is it inside sales? Is it face-to-face? Is it a kind of consultative approach where, as you mentioned there, you have, consultants or engineers first, and they assess the landscape? Do you meet with people? Kind of, how do you engage your target audience?
Yeah, look, in a variety of different ways, and some of it depends on the segment that we're engaging with. If we're dealing with large, enterprises, say some of the large ag enterprises up the value chain, or even some of the larger, maybe consolidated farms, that's typically an outbound approach, and it goes through a long, your very standard SaaS, enterprise deal cycle. When we're dealing with the smaller size of farms, it's a bit more inside sales, driven largely by marketing, and particularly content marketing. Nurturing them through a funnel, and then when they reach the point that they're ready, starting a 14-day free trial. We also have customers that come through without any touch points at all. They come through, they set themselves up, they get on board, and they get going, and we never even speak to them. And that's something we want to encourage more. I think that ultimately, when you're dealing with the customer, it's make it as easy as possible for them to operate the way they want to operate. And so if they want to give you a call, awesome. Make sure you've got someone there answering the phones. But if they don't ever want to talk to you, cool. Let's make sure that setup and that onboarding and the education is really well done. It's in product and it's seamless. So, looking at the future next year, I think we're going to have three different methods. It's going to be a purely product-led growth model, a zero-touch self-serve model. It's going to be, for those who want a little bit more, a little bit more conversation, a little more understanding, calling into an internal team. And then when we're dealing with those bigger businesses, you just have to have an outbound sales.
Yeah, it's funny. I have this in my mind, considering the cohort or the target audience, that you got to rock up to the farm and kind of, have a
That's
conversation,
right.
and spit into your hand, and kind of shake someone's hand and kind of do a deal. But
yeah. Well, and that's one of those stereotypes. And look, and when we do that, it's great to get out. It's incredibly important to get out and go talk to your customers and shake their hand and see it. And particularly for, say, an engineer, when they get out and can actually see the product live in the wild, you just understand the product so much more, and you can come back with all these ideas. But if we ran our whole business from a sales perspective that way, we'd go out of business really fast.
Exactly. It is highly expensive based on your model. And I'll go into the model in a second, and also the, kind of where you're placing some of your big bets, kind of how you're going to grow your business, so there's a couple of ways. There's market expansion, market share, and also I noticed that, you guys are no stranger to mergers and acquisitions either. I see that you guys teamed up a few years ago, or was that an acquisition, or was that a merger, or what was that? You guys
it was an acquisition, and it came out of an investment round from our cornerstone investors based in the UK, the Wheat Sheaf Group, which are an ag tech focused fund. They had a portfolio company in our space, and the founder, they had bought out the founder, and at that point it made sense that we could take on that business, and fold it into ours. And how
was that for you personally? Was that good experience for you, to kind of go through that process?
Look, it was an incredible experience. Definitely one that, we've learned a lot. If we were to go through that again, I think there's ways that we could have done it differently and improve the experience all around. But we tried as hard as we could. And so it's inevitable that you make mistakes in something like that. But I think we've gotten where we needed to get to. And there's we've got, most of the customers that were on that business have now been, as of quite recently, actually, have now been transferred over fully into the AgriWebb product. We've got a great team, that came out of that's over there, close to you in Belfast.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I mean, largely it's been successful, but, when you're a startup acquiring another startup, on the other side of the planet, as you can imagine, it can be tricky. And,
well, especially managing people's expectations,
if
if you have people that put blood, sweat and tears into a business, there tends to be a lot of emotional elements involved that aren't necessarily kind of the right thing to do, but the right thing to do, they feel it's the right thing to do for them, not necessarily for the business,
Sure.
That's interesting.
And communication is the biggest part, right? Communication to the customers, to, the employees, and keeping those communications at a high level when you're so far away is challenging. And it's challenging for any business, particularly one where there's a recent and tectonic shift in the state of play.
So tell us, let's do a little bit of a deep dive on the product itself, and we can spend a couple of minutes on this. So, I'm a farmer. I have lots of activity going on. I don't even know, honestly, kind of what a decent sized customer for you guys is. Is it the size of the herd? Is it, can you tell us what an ideal customer would look like, and how does your product or solutions, how do you solve problems for these folks, and what are the core value propositions around the product, and how do you make money, how do you charge for it, that kind of thing?
Sure. So look, in terms of who our customer is, I mean, it's reasonably broad, in that we have customers, from effectively hobby farmers who, live in the city and maybe have another job, but just kind of want to have a little bit of visibility of what's going on their farm, all the way up to, some of the biggest ag businesses and certainly some of the biggest consolidated farming groups, in the geographies we're operating in. And but that said, I think that where we draw the line is kind of the commerciality of, look, is farming the primary enterprise for you? Is farming your primary source of income? And if it is, then that's a customer that's a target for us. We're actually looking at, potentially developing a freemium offering as well, because those other customers, there's still value that we can create for them. And there's value for us in having more and more users and more feedback and, more and more hopefully positive experiences being communicated around, local communities. But, right now we do not have a freemium offering. So everything is a monthly or a yearly subscription. At the, you can look it up. It's all sitting on the website. And unless you're sort of a very large corporate or enterprise offering, and then, then it's a little bit more bespoke depending on the level of services and some of the individual.
And is that per user, or is it per sheep, or is it per, what is it?
No, it's basically right now it's aligned by features, and well, it's a few things. So it's number of users, number of farms, and number of features.
So multi-axis pricing, pricing. Yeah. Okay.
Yes, but it's largely feature driven. It's not a per seat pricing as you would see in a lot of places. So the biggest differentiator is just the different levels of functionality. To be fair, pricing and packaging is something that's long overdue for a refresh. And actually, we're definitely debating internally. Don't want to give too much away, but debating internally of dropping users altogether. Our objective is to add value to our customers, and we don't want to create an impediment for them to have anyone who they need on their farm, using the product and working.
So how
together.
do you do that, Kevin? Like, what exactly does the product do to enhance somebody's life? If you could give us the highlights.
Yeah, well, sorry, I went down the rabbit hole.
No, it's okay.
Look, from a value proposition perspective, so there's sort of, I think there's three core things that draw people to AgriWebb, and sometimes it even goes in kind of this chronological progression. So first and foremost is just digitizing the record keeping, and that is incredibly simple and it's incredibly basic. But it doesn't matter if you're in Nebraska or Wales or Queensland. Most farmers, a lot of what they're doing is they've got a little notebook they're keeping it in their pocket, and they have a pencil, and they take it out and they write down what they need to. And then when they get home, maybe they transcribe that into a spreadsheet, or sometimes just keep it in the notebook. And it's a simple process in some ways, but as you can appreciate, there's a lot of limitations around data that's written down in a notebook. And so step one is, let's just get people digitizing their record keeping. It's saving them time.
Well, I'd say that little notebook becomes a big notebook very, very quickly.
It becomes a big notebook, and people lose it, and it goes through the wash. I literally can count, it's double digits, the number of customers who have come to us because they were putting their notebook through the wash too many times, and that was a problem. But yeah, it's very basic, but the impact is huge. It saves them a ton of time. It gives them sort of instant access to everything they need to know about their farm to make decisions, in a much more accessible, visual, and simple way. And so that's kind of the gateway. That's how a lot of people just get in, is like, look, I just want to know what's going on. It may sound crazy, but we have customers who come in, they don't even know how many sheep they have. They don't even know how many cows they have.
Right.
Very, very simple data questions. And that's at the most basic end. Once you start having that data, and once you can start, realizing how valuable that is to you, then we can start to push towards more sophisticated decision tools, and actually starting to help with proactive planners and projections forward around performance, and all kinds of reporting that lets people know what's happening and shows changes year on year, and helps you identify where you're overgrazing or undergrazing, or what pastures are performing, all these different business questions you may want to answer, but also allows you to keep up with all the compliance needs, particularly in the UK. And in Australia, there's a huge painful compliance load. You can get audited by the government. You can get fined, for being out of compliance. And that is a painful, onerous process. And so if we can digitize that, simplify it, and automate it in any way, it's adding huge value to our customers, both, preventing negative value, like say a fine, but also creating positive value, enabling people to join, say, an organic accreditation scheme. You can't get labeled organic unless you deal with extremely rigorous requirements. And so if we can simplify that, it actually can add positive value, help people get more dollars or pounds, for their produce. So
do you help them with the rendering process as well? And the reason I know this is I worked with a company years and years ago, and as a side project, one of the head devs, a very, very talented guy, developed a system for cattle rendering, as it's called. So there was only a paper-based process for, let's say, at certain times, as the natural course of nature, you have cows or cattle that die, and there's a process that somebody has to come and pick those up, and then they have to be incinerated in a compliant way, and the compliance elements that you mentioned there. So I'd imagine you guys encapsulate all of that as well. But how do you I'm curious, this is my personal curiosity, how do you count the sheep or the cattle or whatever? Are they tagged? Is it RFID? Are they sending a message to say, I'm here, I'm there, I'm wherever? How is all that done?
Like I said, I think it depends on how the user is operating. It can, sure, at its most basic level, it can be entered manually. One thing we haven't covered off the fact is that we are, as many SaaS companies claim to be, we are a platform, and we integrate with a lot of tools, and the plan is to continue to integrate with more tools. So we know where our boundaries end. We are a software company. We're not a hardware company. We're not a sensor company. We're an imaging company. But there are different groups working on more sophisticated ways of, say, doing that tracking, of whether it's GPS, tags in the ear, whether it's tracking via satellite imaging. And we are every day integrating with more and more of those groups. And something we really see as a big push in 2021 to expand that ecosystem, because we can't do it all. But if we can contextualize those different tools into one platform, bring it together, and make it accessible and digestible for our user, that's where we can add a ton of value. And so, sometimes it can be manual entry, but yeah, there are groups that are looking at different ways of doing that. And we want to make sure that we're easily integrating with those groups. And, that's another huge point of value. As a case in point of some of the integrations we have today, where people have, readers, and they have scales where they're, say, weighing animals and doing these things, we can Bluetooth into those, and we can pull information directly from them in real time. And an animal card can pop up. You can see all the information. You can see when they were last treated. You can see different things happening, as opposed to, say, having that be inaccessible or in a spreadsheet somewhere, and it being a slow manual process. So, yeah, I think that's another, I guess, exciting element that we're going down.
So Kevin, now you mentioned a little bit earlier about perceptions around farming, etc. And I think when you bring data to the table, you change the dynamics of the game entirely. And I'm curious to know, anecdotally, are there any stories that you have from your customer base of things that people were just fully shocked by? They had no idea that this was the case in their operation. Would be any kind of those whimsical stories, or even just insightful stories, as it were, that really struck you from your customer base?
In terms of like, how we can improve what they're doing from, say, a data
very much so, yeah. Or I didn't know that this was the case. This could have gone on too long and would have had a huge impact. It saved me. Well, what sort of insights have you been able to glean from the customer base?
Yeah, I mean, here's a simple example. It's an old one, but we released a feature a while back called an operational planner, where we basically take data that we know about your farm, ask a series of questions based off of things like location, and can create a sort of optimized sequence of events for that business based off the data we know, and have it can sort of be dynamic and update over time as the year goes on. And we had a customer where one of the recommendations was, it was in a colder part of Australia. And one of the recommendations out of that was to shift the date where sheep were sheared. Because based on the temperature and based on the climate, based on what we knew, if you sheared sort of too close to when the animals were getting pregnant, it would have a negative impact on fertility across a large group of animals. And that's exactly what happened. And there was a massive increase in fertility simply by changing that date, and sort of reducing some of the physical challenges when it starts to get closer to winter in southern Australia. And they had no idea. They had just been doing it that way for decades, or maybe even generations, because that was how they had always done it. And no one had ever suggested, hey, maybe if you just shift this 2 to 3 weeks, I forget the exact number, but you'll see something like a 20% uplift in the productivity of your business. And there's lots of little examples like that, but it's always very contextual. It's never like, oh, here's this one thing we're going to give to every business. It's always, oh wow, we had another one where simply having that visibility of knowing basic details of their farm, knowing the size of their farm and the size of their different pastures. One of our customers realized that the person who sells them fertilizer had basically been overcharging them because they had been charging them for a larger field than actually existed. And now he was able to go back and be like, hey, just kidding, you're 50 acres over. I'd like some money back. And so it's always these little anecdotes, these little stories like that. They're really exciting and showing that just this, like I said at the beginning, it's great to have decision tools. It's great to have really complex, features that they're adding huge value and increasing profitability. But like even some of the most basic, I just now have digital access to data. I just now have very simplified visibility. Even that can have a huge impact on a business, which is great.
Sure, no doubt. So shifting gears here a small bit, how do you define your leadership style, and how do you set the tone for culture throughout the organizations to get the best from folks?
Yeah, so look, I think there's a couple of different things in this. One is, to me, the success of a leader comes from the success of the team. I'm a very team-oriented person. As I said, I was a rower and for a long time at a high level, and that was a hugely formative experience for me. And I think that the power of a really high-functioning team can be way greater than the sum of the individual parts. And so it's important for leaders to recognize this isn't about you. The others in the business are the stars in the room. Our success as leaders comes from everyone else and the team being successful, and the team having a really high functioning culture. That doesn't mean that there isn't conflict. It doesn't mean that you don't have difficult conversations and have feedback and make sure people understand when they're not performing. But it does mean that it's very supportive, and it's very team oriented. And there has to be a huge amount of trust. Secondly, for me, like when it comes to leadership, it's not about having the right answer all the time. It's about learning. It's about creating a culture of learning, and trying things and experimentation and making sure that we're always pushing the boundaries. I think one thing I'm very proud of at AgriWebb is that everyone, we're constantly trying new things. There's no barriers, there's no limitations, there's no heavy bureaucracy. It's, hey, we've got problems to solve. Let's figure out the best way to solve them, and anyone can come up with the best ideas, and make sure that we learn from that. Make sure that if we make mistakes, cool, we just found out a new way not to do something. Let's go find a different way. So I think learning, curiosity is critical to a growth mindset. And then I think creating, you don't follow people, you follow a vision. And so it's not being authoritative and sort of demanding that people follow you because that's your position in the org chart in a hierarchy. It's about people choosing to follow great leaders because they're defining the vision of the future, and they're getting the team excited about this big goal. Again, to use a sports analogy, it's about what is that unifying event or competition or whatever it is that's bringing everyone together, very different people together, to get fired up and aligned towards a common goal. And then finally, I think really important to me is balance. Startups are really hard, and they take a really long time to get where you're going, other than those rare few that are definitely the exception, not the rule, right? It's a slog. And so it's got to be fun. You've got to have balance. Sometimes you got to grind, and you got to put in, tough hours to get certain things happening. But if you don't balance that off with, time, quality time with your family, quality time for recovery, like any elite, performance-based activity, rest is just as important as the performance side. If you're an athlete, if you're not sleeping and eating and treating your body right when you're not performing, there's no way you can expect it to happen when you're actually going out and training. So I think the same mentality applies in business. So I think those are some of the things, I try and think about, when I'm trying to lead the business. And I'm learning every day. Similarly, I don't have, like I said, I don't have all the answers, and I'm trying to learn as I go, and I'm experimenting with new things and seeing how it works. But I think those are some of maybe the principles that are really important.
I think the recovery thing is really important that you mentioned, and I know a lot of people that in your kind of position as CEO, co-founder would not have the humility, or at least would not have the honesty to say that that's a vital part of it. They'd like to give the impression that they're pretty much sleeping under the desk every night.
Yeah. And yeah, and I came, when I was studying in school, I came from a biology background, and the first part, when you're sleep deprived, one of the first parts of your brain that starts to malfunction is that discovers creativity and decision making. And if you're a leader in a business, and you're suffering from a lack of creativity and a lack of good decision-making capacity, that's catastrophic. And so, sometimes you do have to put in those crazy hours, but recognize that you're taking a loan off of future productivity that you have to pay back at some point.
Yeah, in fact, actually, I'll go a step further and say that it could inculcate negativity, because I read a study somewhere that when you're in that frame of mind, you're actually something, it's a huge number, something like 62% more dumber in terms of not being in that creative mindset. So Kevin, I could probably ask you a million more questions, and for me personally, I'm completely drawn in to the digitization of agriculture now. You're transforming my mindset. I think this area is absolutely fascinating. But we got to wrap it up. We got to wrap it up shortly. So I always ask people who come on the show what their superpower is. What do you feel is your superpower? What do you bring to the table or to the game? And obviously, you would have certain traits like tenacity and all the stuff that you mentioned are a requirement to get to where you have gotten to at this stage. That's certainly not by chance or by luck. It's hard work and tenacity and all of those kind of things, and having a vision. But in terms of your superpower, where would you feel? What do you think your superpower is, if you were to describe it?
Yeah, look, I'll let others describe it. I think one thing that I've heard now in different elements of my career, different businesses, and also once when as an athlete, is people have described me as the glue. So I think if there's something that I feel very strongly about and try to bring to the table is that cultural glue of just kind of bringing people together. Like I said, one person can only do so much, and so if you don't have a high functioning team, and you don't have a team that is fired up and believes in each other and is greater than the sum of their parts, then you're going to struggle to be successful. Certainly, I think over an extended period of time. And so I think that, for me, it's about, helping to cultivate those high functioning teams, getting people, to work really well together and getting people really excited about the same things, and, keeping them together and when there is, there's conflict that's necessary. There's healthy conflict, but there's dangerously toxic and unhealthy conflict. And so making sure that, you've got more of the good kind and none of the bad kind. And, I think, like I said, that's something that I've had a few different people in different worlds completely independently say, you're the glue of this team. And so if I have to put something on myself, I'll take that one on board.
Yeah, cultural glue. It makes complete sense. And culture will make or break an organization in any instance. I've seen this happen multiple times. I couldn't agree with you more. And I loved what you said very much around learning. We're learning every day. And if I'm not mistaken, that's an Edison quote, whereby we've just found, X thousand ways not to do something else, but it's about the journey, right? Not the destination. And it's something I hold very true. Well, look, Kevin, as we round up here, I really want to thank you for appearing on the show today. You've added a ton of value to our listener base, and I'm sure they'll resonate with an awful lot of what you've said today. And my eyes have been opened to data in agriculture. It's something that I hadn't learned, and I really enjoyed how you've built your business, and wish you every success in the future. I just want to thank you for your time today.
Well, thank you both so much. It was great. I had a great time, and I'm always fired up to talk about this topic. So I appreciate the opportunity.
No doubt. Definitely.
Super. Yeah. We'll and perhaps we'll have you on the show again, Kevin. We'll go specific on some of these things. Like I said, there's just so many things we could ask, but it's hard to believe that we've been candidly discussing all of this for nearly an hour now. So look, wish you the very, very best in the future. It sounds like you guys are on a really decent growth trajectory. And I've no doubt that we'll have more great things to talk about the next time we see you on the show.
Absolutely. There's a lot of exciting stuff coming up. So thank you so much for the opportunity again. Appreciate it.
You've been listening to the Global Tech Leaders Podcast, designed for both established and aspiring career-focused tech rock stars, as well as helping leadership figure out how to speak global in today's multicultural world. For further details, check out sf-talent.com.